Good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Tom Krashan, and I serve as the Chief Legal Officer at the Arc of Indiana. For those unfamiliar with us, the Arc of Indiana is a statewide nonprofit, 501c3 organization that has been advocating for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families for almost 70 years. We'll be able to say officially 70 years next year. Our mission is to ensure that people with disabilities can live, learn, work, and fully participate in the communities. I want to be clear at the onset of today's webinar that this is not a political event. As a nonprofit organization, we can't and don't endorse candidates or parties. What we do believe and what brings us together today is the importance of representation. We know that when people with disabilities and their families are part of public life, when they bring their lived experience into leadership roles, our communities and our policies are stronger. That's the purpose of today's conversation. People with disabilities and their families bring perspectives that are often missing in public office, and that absence has real consequences. When leaders with lived experience serve, policies better reflect the needs and the values and aspirations of the communities they're meant to serve. So representation does matter. This webinar is about encouraging more people with disabilities and their families to see themselves as leaders, whether that's serving on the school board, city council, the state legislator, or other roles in public service. It's about equipping you with knowledge and tools to begin that journey by hearing from people who have been there. The speakers you'll hear from today each represent a different path into leadership. Their journeys are unique, but what they share is disability, either through personally or through family experience, has shaped their decision to serve and continues to shape the way they approach the work in their public offices. At the end of the day, we hope that this sparks new ideas, answers some practical questions that come up about running or serving in an office, and most of all, helps people with disabilities and their families see that public service is open to them. Today, our time will flow. We'll begin with some short introductions from our amazing speakers, Columbus City Councilor Grace Kestler and Indiana State Representative Robb Greene. And then we will move into a conversation about the realities of running for office. After that, we'll open the floor to any questions, so feel free to add any questions in the chat, and we will get to those at the end, and then we'll close with some resources and some next steps for those who want to continue exploring public service. So first, thank you again for being here. This is an important conversation, and I know you'll leave both with useful insights and practical next steps. But with that, let's get started. We'll turn to speaker introductions. I'd like to first introduce Columbus City Councilor Grace Kestler. Councilor Kestler, could you begin by telling us a little bit about who you are, the office you hold, and what led you to run for office?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom and Kim and members of the Arc of Indiana for welcoming us and asking us to be a part of this. I have been involved with the Arc previously through employment and know that the work they do is just tremendous. And so thank you to everyone who's joining today to hear about this session. But I am down here in Columbus, Indiana, and grew up here and lived here the majority of my adult life. Live here now with my husband and my stepson, who's 10. And I also have a physical disability that I've had my entire life and use a wheelchair. And so have navigated through that. In my free time, I love to travel as well. And so it's been interesting to travel and gain perspective of accessibility in other communities and states and bring back potential ideas for improvements to our own community. I ran for Columbus City Council in 2019. So I ran and won that election. And so my first day was January 1st, 2020. And you know what happened 2020. So it's been a strange first 4 years. And then I ran again and started my second term last year. And so I'm in my 6th year of office here as city councilor. And in general, I'd say what led me to politics was I've always considered myself as someone to be involved in my community. And I started to learn more about where decisions were made and just recognize that a lot of those commissions, councils, and activities at the city level didn't have many individuals or really anyone that I noticed at that time with a very noticeable physical disability. And someone who was maybe a bit younger as well. And so I felt that the best thing to do was to get involved and take that opportunity to get to know my community and run for office, and then be really humbled with the now chance to engage, continuously with constituents. But yeah, I'll leave it there as I won't dive too much further, I'm sure, to accidentally answer questions, but thank you.
That's excellent. Thank you. Now I'd like to turn to State Representative Robb Greene. Representative Greene, could you share with us again kind of who you are, the office you hold, and what led you to decide to run for office?
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, everybody. I'm in the state legislature. I represent District 47 in the Indiana State House, which is Western Shelby County and about the southern 2/3 of Johnson County. I live in the Shelby County part with my wife, Erin, and our 3 kids on a small little hobby farm out there. And I had sort of a roundabout way into politics. I got involved with campaigns while I was in college. I had the opportunity to run a race when in my early 20s. I don't know why the candidate even trusted a 20-year-old kid, a 20-year-old kid with his race, but had some success with that and just found myself, I said, I guess this is what I do now. And so I found myself working on campaigns through my 20s and early 30s. State, local, federal level, had the chance to go to DC, was always very much happy behind the scenes, never envisioned kind of stepping onto this side of the stage. I liked being behind the curtain, working for people, and thought I had left kind of politics in the background. But when our firstborn son came along, we started to know some challenges with him, and cut to he got an ASD diagnosis around 2019, and I tell people it reoriented our entire family. And I probably didn't have the same level of value that my wife had. She comes from a medically adjacent background, so I mean, she took right to being able to navigate ABA therapy and with the waiver and advocacy on this, and I felt sort of outmatched in a lot of that. And really just as a way to kind of, I don't know, advocate on behalf of my son, I looked around and I fell back on something that I was very familiar with just politics. And I didn't see too many people around the legislature that had a parent's perspective on this. And as everyone on this call likely knows, if you yourself live with a disability or you're a loved one, it's usually where the change comes from. I mean, every story that you hear of somebody that makes an impact on this, it's usually a parent or a loved one that frankly just didn't have options. And so that was really my motivating factor to run in 2022. And so I just completed my 3rd session, and yeah, happy to get into the questions now.
Thanks, Representative. So thank you both for sharing those introductions, giving us a little bit of background on your journeys. I know every journey is unique, so that's a good perspective for the attendees. Let's move into a kind of a broader conversation of what it actually looks like to run for office. To start off, I'd like to ask you both, not a broad question at all, but how should someone get started if they're interested in running for office? We'll start with Councilor Kestler.
Yeah, not a tough question at all. No. Something I often thought about, and both myself and Representative Greene shared, more of the personal side why we were getting involved with politics. But I think that's what can drive you for that initial engagement. Is there something you're truly passionate about? Whether that's the personal relationship you have with someone with a disability, or you yourself has a disability, or maybe it's something completely different, water, the environment, roads, you name it. There is an avenue to get engaged. And so one of the most important things that I found was just starting to listen to friends, family, community members about what they were really interested in the city, and keeping an open mind that obviously people have very different interests on what they find most important to the city. And frankly, most people aren't going to necessarily list their top interest as my top interest. And so recognizing that if you're going into this role, you do have to have a broad perspective, and that you will be engaging with many issues and concerns across the city or the state, depending on your role. And so just keeping an open mind in that, and that you're representing all people in your community or in your district. And the best additional way to learn about what's going on and where you're considering running is to start showing up to meetings. They might not seem that exciting at first, or they might seem a bit confusing, but for me, I found that consistently going to meetings, you can hear the rhetoric, you can hear the conversations, and get to know the people who are currently engaged. Follow up with them, ask them questions, and really figure out, is this something that I want to devote my time to?
Great, thank you. Representative Greene.
Yeah, when I made my decision to run, it was rooted in having a conversation with my wife. It was it's incredibly important to get buy-in from your family. If you have a significant other, if you have children, loved ones around you, it becomes to campaign at any level, and the higher you get, obviously, if your family's not on board, it can be a real stressor. And so having that support, everybody being on the same page with the vision to run is incredibly important. Second is, can you afford to do it with your job? I serve with a lot of people who, if they're not, they run their own business, right? And there are a lot of people who it can become a challenge to take off the time to be able to campaign and dedicate the time you need for a campaign if you haven't had those conversations with an employer, or if you own your own business, if you have the ability to take that time off. It's a huge stressor both on family and work. And then, it's also important to take a look at what the opportunities are with the office itself. The legislature, I have a lot of freedom to focus on issues that affect Hoosiers with disabilities. If you were running for and the councilor does as well. I mean, we both serve in legislative roles at our respective levels. If you were to run for your county commission, 99% of what you're dealing with would be roads, rezones, planning commission things. The opportunity to be able to affect change on an issue that you really care about would be there, but the vast majority of the work and input you'd be doing would be on issues that don't affect it. So seek out the right office as well on where you can make an impact in your local community. I think that's an important thing to consider, additionally to getting support from friends and loved ones as well.
That's great. Both very helpful. And we know, getting started is one thing, but running a campaign obviously takes skills and support. So where can someone find help with those basics, like training, building networks, recruiting volunteers? We'll start with Representative Greene.
My campaign was pretty simple, but unlike other people, I had a background in this. So, I mean, I had some force multipliers that other people wouldn't have. Your church, your family, networks in the disability community. Those are the volunteers that you should reach out to first and foremost. In terms of training, getting involved on a campaign as a volunteer, if there's a candidate that you support and you're able to volunteer, you pick up a lot. I learned a great deal in my early part of my career just by showing up on campaigns and seeing what was happening, watching what the tempo was when people were doing certain things, and whether it was a primary or the general election, watching some of the tactics and things that people spent money on, and even frankly listening to the conversations. You just pick up a wealth of knowledge by doing. And certainly it would have to be somebody that shares your values or that you want to support, but real world experience like that on a campaign is invaluable. There are a lot of groups that can help with first time candidates. Sometimes both the Republican and Democrat Party, they're clubs in a way, and so there's a lot of gatekeeping. So I don't want to, but they are a resource. I can share lots of stories where somebody with good intention shows up at their local county GOP or Democrat Party, and the people that have been around there for 10, 20 plus years. And so some people get very discouraged because they'll show up and want to get involved, but you just have to keep in mind human nature on a certain level too. there are groups that can help with trainings. I know at least on Right of Center, Leadership Institute out of Arlington, Virginia does a lot of grassroots activist training, first time candidate training, media training, how to do direct mail. They have a breakout session for just about anything. They do trainings around the country regionally, or you could go to their school in Arlington, Virginia. That's something that I did in my early 20s and got a lot of value at just understanding sort of the nuts and bolts of local campaigning, particularly grassroots. And unless you're running for a federal office, which is more about the money, anything below Congress is all about grassroots. And I don't care what anybody says. It's shoe leather, it's personal contacts, it's putting in the time and doing the work, which doesn't require a tremendous amount of training. It just requires a tremendous amount of personal investment and the willingness to do it.
A lot of door knocking, right?
Yeah.
Right, Counselor?
Absolutely. As Representative Greene mentioned, there are many resources online, partisan, nonpartisan, all across the page to help individuals just understand the basics of running, from how to set up a bank account to how to knock on doors, as Tom mentioned. And I think getting a good understanding of that is really helpful. Speaking with someone who's already in office, if you can, even if it's a local office, and you're running for a different office, to really understand what their perspective is and maybe how they went about things. And of course, everyone might do it a little bit differently, but as many perspectives that you can get around that are extremely helpful. And absolutely, I agree with the grassroots piece. People that in your life and your community are great at writing, maybe great at website building, great at designing, great at stuffing envelopes. Calling on your friends and family who are excited for you to run for this office are really helpful, because a lot of it is just logistical marketing and strategy of sharing your message and time. Yeah, scheduling the time to reach out to individuals, to door knock, and to develop these things. You are your own staff, and understanding that it will require a lot of time from you and your immediate family, probably, to get going on that, and volunteers as well. I'll second that. Local parties, I think, can be really helpful depending on your community, but don't be necessarily discouraged if they aren't helpful, I would say. So anyone can sign up and run for office, whether they have a connection with their local or state party or not. And so if you can make that, there are plenty of resources within there, and that often comes with volunteers and people who have the time to give to your campaign and others.
Great. So let's talk about another important decision. I think you both alluded to this in your last answer. So political party affiliation. It often shapes the path into public service, not always, but it often does. How did each of you navigate that decision, and what advice would you give others who are thinking about it? Start with Councilor Kestler.
Yeah, absolutely. I found that at the local level, especially in city council, that issues are often less partisan. At least I would like to think that everyone wants clean water, good roads, nice parks that are cared for. And so I tried to focus a lot of my work less on party affiliation. At the end of the day, I had to choose one to run for office, but I reminded people that, similar to what Representative Greene said, at this local city council level, we don't have decision-making authority over a lot of the hot topic issues. And so whether we agree on those or not in the community, it doesn't matter, because I can't necessarily make a decision on that. And so I tried to help individuals understand that we have a lot more in common than maybe different. And at this level, locally, we probably agree on a lot of things. And so that was just an educational thing. I think one of the hardest parts of running at a very local office is potentially, depending on your community, the lack of media around office or office running and campaigns. And so it's really on you to make sure to share that, just because you're running under one affiliation doesn't mean you need to be put in a box. You might have thoughts and feelings all across the board. And so you do have to work hard to share those and kind of overcome that potentially polarizing situation that we're kind of in right now. But I think it's possible.
Great. Thank you. Representative Greene.
Yeah, back to the, evaluate the office, your local county clerk or the Indiana Secretary of State website have previous, historical election results. And I think even down to the precinct level, you can look at things like that. I would say it's very important to consider the community you're in. If I were in Washington Township of Marion County, I would not be in the General Assembly. It's just kind of the reality of certain political geographies. I'm in a pretty red district, and and I ran in a contested Republican primary, and so my fight was in the primary at that time. If a Democrat were to run in my district, they would not have a chance. I mean, just to be very candid, I mean, the way some of these districts are drawn, people are fairly sorted, and Indiana has, we have straight ticket voting. And so certain percentages of the electorate are going to pull a straight ticket for Republican or a straight ticket for Democrat or even a straight ticket for Libertarian. And while there are a lot of individuals who split their vote or scratch or, are truly independent, that's something to really overcome. And so looking at how historical election results are in your district should not be taken lightly, because I look at a lot of individuals who their heart is in the right place. They want to make a difference, but they may live in an area or be running for an office where it's an incredible uphill battle. And I think people need to go into that eyes wide open on what their community is. To the councilor's point, municipal elections are held in their own year. They're in an odd year. I do think that they are more standalone. I do think, while partisan nature does play a part in them, it plays less of a role in that, because I think it's the person that the person you've talked to, you've had a conversation with. So I think municipal is its own sort of creature within the larger spectrum of offices that you could run for. But if you're running for the state legislature, the House or the Senate, a county office, something like that, it's incredibly important to think about what your community makeup is politically there, because the last thing I would encourage someone to do is, if you're in a place where it's just such an uphill fight, maybe that campaign is more about drawing attention to an issue than understanding that you may not win that one. But it's sort of the sad reality of just how sordid and partisan things are, that that needs to be a part of someone's decision-making process when they're running.
Yep, that's absolutely right. Now, talking about another practical challenge, not only the district you live in, but one of the most practical challenges for running is fundraising, right? How did you approach fundraising, and what lessons did you learn along the way? We'll start with Representative Greene.
So I ran against the sitting incumbent, so I knew I was not going to get any institutional money. So there are a lot of PACs and groups that are out there that they like to give to the one they think is going to win, or the person that's in there. They don't like to take chances. Most institutional donors don't like to step out on a limb. They don't want to be on the wrong side of a vote, because it's about a relationship there. I had to do it through friends, family, and personal connections. And the thing I tell any first-time candidate is the most important first step to raising money is putting together a friends and family letter. I sat down with my wife and we compiled every single spreadsheet of every single list. I went back through high school yearbooks. My wife has a very robust Christmas card list that she loves for her Christmas card letter, and she's very excited about. That was the backbone of my very first fundraising letter. We took everybody that had any sort of connection, and you can go pretty deep. I went back and added my 5th grade elementary school teacher to that list. And you'll be shocked at the people that you may not even have had a conversation with in decades, that when you have a compelling story of why you're running and why you're involved, you have a personal connection with that person, whether as a friend, a family, or a colleague. I was more amazed at the people that I did not do a good enough job maintaining a relationship with that wrote me substantial checks that I hadn't talked to in years, and was probably a little more surprised at some of my family that that didn't write a check or chip in at that time. But I raised the bulk of what I needed for my campaign off of a very, very expansive list of anybody that I'd ever had a connection to in life. And look, people like to be asked, right? And at a minimum, they could just throw it in the trash and say no, not respond. So do not let personal pride or thinking that, well, I haven't called this person in a year, now I'm asking them for money. Don't let any of that stand in the way. If you're on this Zoom call right now, you care about an issue, and it's probably the issue that's going to drive you to run. And don't and keep that in your mind as you raise money, because nobody likes to do it unless you're in sales and you're comfortable with cold calls and making the ask. It's something that is in human nature that nobody likes to do. So you really have to overcome that and just steel yourself to putting your pride aside and saying, hey, I need X amount of dollars from you, and this is, to help me get here to run for this office.
Very helpful. Thank you. Councilor?
Yeah, absolutely. It can definitely feel awkward, I think, and especially for me personally, coming from a nonprofit background where I had fundraised and for many years and then was asking money for myself for a campaign. And I really struggled with that at first. And I recognized that it's not necessarily for me, it is for the vision of maybe, what I stand for, or, people are, contributing to whether, change or they're your friend, they believe that you have a good perspective and will bring maybe a good perspective to your decision making. And so try not to internalize that they're just giving you money, they're giving money to the overall per se mission. And as it was mentioned, asking everyone that for funds is tough, but I think it's really a great place to start. There are also some additional routes. For example, you can be endorsed by other organizations that sometimes come with some funding, whether that's PACs or for example, Indiana Young Dems has one that I applied for, and all across both sides of the board, there are opportunities around the state, and I'm sure even nationally, where organizations want to fund individuals who are putting in the work. And so lots of routes to look for that. Also, never underestimate, the small amounts as well. We, want people to feel a part of the campaign. And often when people give to something, whether that's a nonprofit or a campaign, they do feel like they're making an impact. And so don't minimize the $5 and definitely, appreciate those just as much really as maybe the $100 or the $500. And more of a tactical thing, I like to incentivize giving. So, give $25, you get a t-shirt. Give $100, you get two t-shirts or something, but people like stuff. So if you can find affordable ways, of course, that fit within your budget to, incentivize them, and then they have a t-shirt they can wear out and about, that also helps with your advertising. And the last thing I'll say is, while it's kind of difficult to create a budget, as Representative Greene mentioned, knowing your community and your win numbers and how many people vote, and kind of breaking that down by, what does this look like for how many mailers do I need to send? What does that cost? How many Facebook advertisements? How many shirts do I need to print? How many advertisements? Trying to get a rough number of what you really need to raise will help, rather than just some arbitrary number. And local elections, such as city council, I ran at large, so that means it's the entire community versus just a district race. But the funds needed are much less than maybe a state race. So I think it's much more achievable in that sense.
Yeah, it's great. I know it's a uncomfortable aspect for some people, but it's a necessary evil. Campaigns cost money, so that's very helpful. Looking back at your time in office so far for both of you, what is one important lesson that you've learned that you think new candidates should know? We'll start with you, Counselor.
Yeah, should know. Yeah. Um, we've kind of already talked about this a little bit, but I think it's important to remember that Rome wasn't built in a day. And I think when you're running, the reality of it is you're really excited and then you get elected and you're like, I'm going to do all of these things, and you can, and maybe you will over your term or multiple terms. But it does take a little time to get an understanding of really how the city's working once you're elected and in that position and how it's going. And so it takes a little more patience in that sense. And so I think also, again, understanding what you can and cannot impact in your role is really important. If you run on a hot issue item and you're running for city council, but that's a state decision, then you're going to get in office and not be able to keep those promises that you made or what you've told individuals. And so be realistic about what you're telling people and what you can actually change. And I think that's, again, talking to people who are currently elected, who have ran for office or who work for the community, to really understand, what's being talked about, what's coming across as decisions that have to be made.
Representative Greene.
Yeah, it's a marathon, not a sprint. I think people always ask, like, was it what you expected when you got in there? And they always chuckle when I say, well, I had pretty low expectations going in. And I mean that in the healthiest of ways. Having worked on the other side of it in the first part of my life, I saw that there's a lot of energy when you first come in. You think you're Mr. Smith goes to Washington and you're going to change the world and pass 10 bills. In reality, at least in the legislature, if you dedicate yourself to one bill, even then you're probably less than 50% odds of getting that bill, even some form of it passed. We two chambers of 150 people and then an executive branch and then the dozens and dozens of stakeholders and lobbyists. Anybody that has an issue with what you're trying to do at any given time can derail or change or completely throw up a roadblock to something that you're doing. I think for the specific nature of this group here today, having a why, like everyone here's why, goes pretty far. I'm naturally sort of a cynical person as my wife would probably attest to, but we both made a very honest and open decision that we would use our family story to be able to advocate here, and we're very and I'm sure some people look at us and they think that might be a little craven, but we tell our son's story and we use our son and we put a face to why I'm here and why we're doing what we're doing, and we made that decision as a family. And I'll say this, that humanizing what you're trying to do, especially on these issues, still counts for something. I have a few committee chairs. When I go in to talk to them about a bill, they know when they see me walking in through the door, they're probably not going to push back too hard on certain things. They know where I'm coming from and they know why I'm there. If you're an elected official that's doing something that doesn't have that personal component, you're wanting to make some change to gaming laws in Indiana or something like that. There's an angle there, right? Like, that's not truly changing people's lives. That's some issue that you've gotten on and that you're trying to make that you're trying to advance, probably for some sort of, less than ideological reason, right? If you're wanting to focus on disability issues there, it's an immediate connection to other people that they understand there's a why there, and it's not something that you're in it for. And that still goes a tremendous way with people, because as cynical as politics is, it still counts for something, that you are trying to do something good. And when it's an issue like this, I think people understand where you're coming from a lot quicker than when dealing with somebody else. When I ran in the primary, I had a lot of people that I had worked with that told me, is like, you're really talking about disability issues in a Republican primary. And I said, yeah, frankly, because it's the why. And even if it wasn't something that touched them directly, it wasn't some meat and potato issue for them to vote on. It was a way that they could immediately see why I was running, and it wasn't just to be a name, to be something, to hold an office, which there are a lot of people that just want to run for something just because they want to run for something. And it went a long way. And not to mention, with at least in the rates of autism in this community, when you factor in other disabilities across the board, you don't have to go very far to find somebody at their door that's touched by this issue, either directly in their immediate household or church, work, extended family. And so, this is an issue that I think needs to be more broadly talked about, because it does touch people on a personal level. And when you campaign, I quickly found that it is something that is more broadcast than traditional ideological issues that people want to talk about, like, taxes or social issues or other things like that.
That's great. I first want to remind any attendees that we're going to end with a question and answer. So we're going to open the floor. So if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will go through those before we end. Representative Greene mentioned the why. I think it's a great segue to my next question for you both. Both of you bring disability experience, personally or through family, to your work. How has that shaped your approach to public service and the priorities that you bring to your role? You touched on it a little bit, Representative Greene, but if you could expand.
Yeah, Indiana has a part-time legislature, so a lot of people can bring their experiences to that in that role. If you're someone that is in the construction trades and you build homes, obviously that's someone that gets to work on a lot of those issues that affect housing in the state of Indiana. For me, this is sort of my motivating, my animating issue here in the legislature. And so I was, I'm trying to carve this out as an area of expertise with the help of people like Kim and Tom behind me, to be able to focus on that. And having that personal experience, like I said, is really key to cutting through what someone's motivations are. And, that's an important part of this. It gives you something to be known for and specialize in. As Grace said, any office you serve in has a whole host of complex issues that you're going to have to deal with, many of which are going to be outside of this space. And you're not going to be able to be an expert on them all. But if you're in a role that has more of a legislative side on a council, on a board, in the legislature, having speciality is very important. And if this issue is your speciality, other people will come to you when they want to know about it. So when I have colleagues that they get, constituents in their own districts who reach out to them on issues of Medicaid or on issues of, what's the state doing in ABA, they know, hey, I'm going to immediately pick up the phone and call Rob because I want to know, like, hey, what's really going on here? So that's incredibly helpful to have something that you specialize in, so that you could be the policy expert in that within a very diverse body, but also be the person that other people are reaching out to, because that's another form of influence. Like, you may not be passing a bill, but if you're able to, be lobbying colleagues on the same, political body that you serve on these issues, that's just as good as sometimes passing legislation, is to, build coalitions within.
Great. Yeah, Councilor.
Yeah, those are great. I think for me, it's, at the local level, at city council, we are not making decisions necessarily around policy, around healthcare, these types of things. But disability and the lens of disability can be overlaid of many different things. So whether it's parks, or engineering and related to sidewalks, or we're building a new building at our community, it's helpful when you have someone and where they can bring their perspective to that project. For example, we just built a new sports complex, remodeled an old mall type of situation. And I really pushed, and it's a parks related project, but really pushed for the new family restrooms to have at least one adult size changing table. While that was not required by law, I think it's really important because it shows the community or visitors that that you're welcome here and that there are accommodations for you here. And so that wasn't necessarily a vote or a political city council decision, but those were conversations because I was elected that I was a part of. And so bringing, I don't speak for all people with disabilities, but I can, bring that personal experience and help other individuals who might not be as familiar with it to think about that perspective. I think the reality of it is, unfortunately, that unless people have a disability, are personally impacted by a disability in some way through family or directly, sometimes it's a little out of sight, out of mind, despite the ADA. And it, frankly, can be very frustrating. But when the community sees that there are people with disabilities who are engaged in these types of things, they, I think, see more that, well, okay, these are important issues, and people with disabilities deserve a seat at the table, metaphorically and physically, and bringing up that perspective, I think, has been really useful. um, um, the one I was going to share one perspective as well that I found that I didn't necessarily expect going into this, was that I actually made a lot of connections with individuals in the aging population and seniors, because they were experiencing the exact same thing that I was experiencing, mobility concerns. And that might mean independence that was lost because there wasn't a great public bus transportation, or the downtown sidewalks are bumpy. Whatever that might be for them, I could relate to that. And so it was interesting to put, despite the age difference, we had really good conversations, and by finding that common ground. And so yeah, I think at the end of the day, while I said, a lot of people might not understand the disability perspective, people, the reality of it is, will at one point in time of their life probably be affected by disability directly or indirectly. And so that realization can seem kind of more like sad, I think, to some people, but it shouldn't be that. And it should be, well, if anyone in this room, would acquire a disability, wouldn't they want to be engaged actively still in their community? Wouldn't you want to be able to go out and about and go to your favorite farmer's market or festival? And so that, that's what we're looking for everyone currently. And let alone the fact that universal design and those things help everyone.
Great. Incredibly helpful for me both. Thank you. I'm going to close this portion with more of a personal question, then we'll get into we'll open the floor from some of the chat questions. So again, if you have any questions, please throw them in the chat and we'll get to them. What advice would you give to someone who thinks they aren't the type who runs for office? Because I know that maybe some people battling with that as they're watching this. We will start with you, Councilor.
Well, that's exactly why you should run for office. Because we need more of not the types running. I think there's no one type. And as I already said, people with disabilities deserve a seat at the table. Every, type of person, background, representative deserves a voice at the table in some way. So whether that's an elected position or committee or council, and when those voices are at those tables, we see change. And so as Representative Greene mentioned, he's become very vocal about his concerns and is about his personal family story. And I bring that personally as well, as these items impact me personally. And if I wasn't there or he wasn't there, maybe that story wouldn't be told. And so I always say, if not you, who? And maybe there are some other who's out there, but never underestimate that your voice, no matter what your background is truly beneficial. And if you want to make change in your community, you deserve that opportunity.
Excellent. Representative Greene.
I mean, nobody really has the personality to run with this. I mean, I'm an introvert by nature. I'm a middle-aged bald guy. I mean, I'm not as central casting, you know. And I think there's a perception of, you know, they look at the shallowest of politicians that you see portrayed in the media and in movies, and you know, you think you have to be in some vein of that, and you really don't. I mean, it's personal connection, having a why, doing the work goes a long way.
Mhm.
And just going back, you know, not to revert back to a previous question, but running for anything at the state on down to the local level, door to door is the most impactful thing that you could ever do. It is the gold standard of grassroots politics. And when you're at someone's door and you're having a conversation with them, they get to know you. Most people aren't able to do that work. Don't want to do that work. You know, the people that I see that run in races, the ones that knock more doors are the ones that usually win, outside of those that even raise more money. And not to say that money's not important, but any sort of deficiency that you have on your campaign, or a disadvantage that you have on your campaign to an opponent or in the race itself, can be overcome with just that personal connection. And so um, doing that work goes a long way. Not taking yourself out of the running because you feel that you can't. I mean, nobody gives speeches anymore. This isn't the 1960s where you're showing up and giving stump speeches even for a legislative race. So much of this, with all the media that we have and social media, and everybody has very, very busy schedules, all those things are almost become secondary to just quietly doing the grassroots work on a campaign. And it's not about giving speeches, or, you know, even creating, you know, pithy TikToks and real videos or things like that. And if that is your skill set, use that to your advantage. But as an introvert, I kind of look at this more of how I would do things, and I'm a little bit more one-on-one. I'm a little bit more direct. I like more analog approaches to how I reach out to both voters and constituents. And so if that's you, don't let that hold you back. You could find your own pathway within a campaign, or within office itself, on how you interact with people. I'm not on social media at all. I've made a choice to do different forms of outreach with people that are more direct and a little bit more personal than that. And, you know, find that style that works for you, that's authentic to you and who you are as a personality. And don't let anybody tell you that, you know, you have to be or look a certain way, or have certain you know, social skills even to get up in front of a crowd. There's really not that much of it on a campaign, is if you can imagine it.
Excellent. That's incredibly helpful. So I very much appreciate that. Kim, I'm going to turn it over to you to see if there's any questions that we want to ask from the attendees.
Sure. And first, I'm going to go to Grace, who wanted to do a follow-up to that last question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just had one more comment about that I was reminded of on door knocking. I mean, I'm gonna be frank, I use a power wheelchair and cannot walk. And so door knocking was something at first I thought, well, this will be interesting. It required me to go with someone else all the time. I did think about like throwing like leaves or so, they paper airplanes at their front doors or something, but it also really know whether you're a wheelchair user or not, showing up at someone's front door and speaking to them. I will say most people are nice, but is pretty impactful. People see that you're here at my door and you want to talk about what is important to me and why you're running. I think it goes a long way. And so while it might seem, brief and silly, it's really important. And as well for me with the disability, my friend or someone would knock on the door and they'd be like, well, my friend's running for office. She's down there on the sidewalk. And it would also immediately give them the person who lived there the perspective of, oh, wow, my house is not accessible. These stairs, oh, wow, she's out here doing this. And it just gave them a moment to be like, oh, there are barriers in our community for this and around this. And that's pretty neat that she's willing to do that. And so don't let those physical barriers, I suppose, no matter what your disability might be, hold you back. And then there are you know, the ARC is a great resource, and there are ways to navigate, you know, those challenges and finding ways to get your campaign and your voice out there, even though there might be disability related barriers.
Great. Thank you, Grace. Kind of a follow-up to that, and just to kind of state it more clearly, does somebody need to have a college degree or be employed by a specific organization or hold a certain job in order to run for office?
No.
No. I think maybe certain judicial judges, maybe, but I'm not sure if it's technically legally required. Definitely not. So that goes back to the, if not you, who? Look at the current people who might be elected in your area and check out their background, and I guarantee that most of them don't necessarily have some grand political background and education around this. They're just passionate about making a change in their community.
Yeah, outside of the judicial offices, I mean, I think people would be pretty surprised. Like, you don't even need to have a forensics background or a medical background to be a coroner in Indiana. So that should
It's strange too.
that should tell you something, that Indiana is pretty wide open and not having any sort of bona fides for certain offices. So don't ever let degree in political science or degree in this or that or certain jobs stop anybody. We're a citizen, at least we're a citizen legislature, part-time legislature, and local and county offices are the same. It's people that live in your community that have a heart for it that are running.
Great. Thank you both for that one. How do you balance the pressure that occurs sometimes between political party and what you think is the right thing to do? So specifically the pressure of following political leadership at times. Grace, do you want to hit that one first?
This question wasn't in the chat. I wasn't prepared. I'm just kidding. Can you repeat the question one time, please, Kim?
How do you balance the pressures that occur sometime between political party and what you think might be the right thing to do?
Yeah, that's a tough one, I think. Again, locally, sometimes I think it might be a little easier. Not as many hot topics, not as much of that pressure, I think, or at least in my community. Reminding people that you might be running with a party, but you are your own person and your own vote and your own perspective at the end of the day. It's not our fault that there's only so many party, you know, 2-3 party system, I suppose. You know, we're working within the confines of that. And so I encourage people to reach out to me and talk through items. But yeah, that's a tricky one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Medicaid guy, and as an issue, and so I'm at odds at times with the fiscal hawks in the caucus that I serve in. But people know where I'm coming from. They know that's my issue. They don't make it personal when I go my own way on things like that. Honesty and consistency go a long way. At least at the legislative level, when we have, we're very heavily caucus based, right? And within a caucus, nobody wants to be surprised. Like, and I highly doubt anybody that's on this Zoom call now would be very quiet or change positions on an issue like this. But that's really the only thing that gets you sideways with people that you work with in this space, is that if your position changes and you're not clear. And I think everybody that would be on this call would be incredibly clear on where they stand, and it's something that is deeply personal to you, that you're never going to really have that issue, because people understand, like, that is your thing. People in my caucus understand, like, Rep Greene, he's going to be over here on this, and if there's an issue that crosses or intersects anything in that space, I may be with him, I may not be with him based on, what that issue is, but I know that's where he's coming from. So I haven't had that specifically be the case in anything that I've done, because everybody knows that that's my policy wheelhouse, and they don't expect me to, change a vote if they even would ask me to do. It wouldn't even come up, because I'm pretty clear on it.
Great, thank you for that. What about role models? Could you each please share just a little bit about who's somebody in your life that you have seen as a role model?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in rural Indiana. I didn't see a lot of role models, frankly. Went to a pretty small school, went to a very small school, university, and I think that was frustrating. And so I think that's why I'm involved even more now. And so that people can see that there are people with disabilities out and about in our community, and they are running for office, and they are, engaging. And so I had, other role models per se, but the media, in the late 90s, it didn't, disability wasn't portrayed really either. And so it's hard to have those role models. And so I think that's actually an even more of a testament for individuals to run, and, and sharing your why. And so that other people can see that, oh, that's me too, or I can relate to that person. And, they're making this change. I could do that too, whatever you might represent.
My son has actually become a role model in a certain way. He's just such a sweet spirit and doesn't really let life or anything affect him. And I can be a little bit more mercurial and take things personally in this. And I just, whenever I had a bad day or a bad week or something doesn't go my way, or something that you thought you were very close to getting a win on, and then you have the rug pulled out from under you, and you have a tendency to just be you want to get back at somebody, or you want to be angry or have words with somebody, especially in a in a very contentious legislative setting during session. I'd go home and just recenter around my son, and he would always sort of bring me back. I mean, he's obviously my why in doing this, but just how he approaches life and just how he views life kind of is a lesson I'm not sure I've fully been able to learn, but he definitely challenges me in just watching how he approaches it. So I mean, he's sort of a non-traditional role model, and I should be one to him, but he's oftentimes more of one to me.
Right. What about achievements? Can you each share something that you are proud of achieving as an elected official? And then on the contrast of that, something that you have found as a challenging experience that you had to work through?
Going back to the marathon, not a sprint, having the right expectations of what you're trying to accomplish and understanding it may take multiple years to do, is incredibly important. And I some of the things that I care about the most in this or have gotten done have all been incremental wins, right? Like it's the ability to, it's so difficult to pass a bill, like I said earlier, but sometimes getting language inserted, like some very small snippet of something that does something into a larger bill, either as an amendment or, something tacked on to a larger bill as a rider, it can go a long way. And those are it's really, you got to I take heart in the small victories that I'm able to do. Because I know that, look, as Councilor Kestler said, it can be very challenging. That this is, I like to tell people, disability is the last seemingly socially acceptable form of discrimination. Just people they want to be out of sight, out of mind, right? And I deal with a lot of that at the state level too. And I say that would be kind of my frustration on the second part of that question is just getting people to open their eyes who aren't touched by this, that don't really have that level of experience with it, and maybe just look at it as a math equation at the end of the day, which we see so much of. And so I guess one of the things that I take as a win is if I can get other colleagues to almost to understand this on a personal level, not a fiscal level at times, I consider that a win, I guess.
Thank you. Councilwoman?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me is bringing up some of those conversations that might not have happened before. Frankly, I used the example of the adult changing table in the new facility. That conversation was harder than it needed to be. And while at the end of the day, it seems kind of small, I was really glad that my voice kind of flowed through, because again, as we've already said, people might wonder who needs this or why do we need this, and not see that connection. And or better yet, they might say, well, there's no one here who visits here who needs this. And then you ask yourself, well, why aren't they visiting? Maybe there's not a resource or an accommodation that's there for them. And so things around that, and it, is well related to simple things like the website. I've really encouraged and pushed the city to update their website and make sure their website guidelines are up to date. We have a long way to go, but just being overly transparent about accessibility items within city buildings, and including that on the website, I think is really important. And allowing for opportunities for people to engage no matter what their disability is. And so that their voice can be heard, so that we know their concerns in the community. And so I'm excited to see how that's come along, but it's also been a challenge because, as was mentioned, if it's something that costs money, sometimes there's pushback on that, even though it's not only the right thing to do, sometimes it's legally required, whether it's physical ADA requirements or website. And so helping people understand that accessible environments and platforms and opportunities for people to engage truly helps democracy, for lack of a better word. It brings people to the table to allow them to share their perspective, and creates a vision, I think, for the community. And so without that, then we're not seeing the whole picture. So.
Great, thank you for that. One last question, and then just a couple of statements that people have been texting or putting in the chat. What about somebody who sometimes just says what's in their head and doesn't, think thoughtfully about the words that come out of their mouth? Is that sometimes a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it depends on the situation, right? Authenticity is a word that gets thrown around a lot in this business. Is something that people want to own. And whenever I see campaign materials where they use the word authenticity, I'm immediately like, if you're having to put it in there, it's something, you're probably not authentic, right? I think if that's who you are, and what you're saying is the truth and direct, then people have, I'm a firm believer that people interact and accept other people, even if it's something that is new to them or unknown to them, if it's inherent to who they are as a person. In case in point, if you have a friend who is known for being punctual all the time, and they're always show up and they're always on time and they give their word and they're going to be someplace, and then that person doesn't do it, that's more offensive than your happy-go-lucky friend who, shows up 30 minutes late, or you invite out to a dinner and then no shows, right? Like how people receive you is inherent to how you are as an individual, I think. And I don't think that that's something that you should be too concerned about. If it's who you are and what you're saying is honest and earnest, then, yeah, I wouldn't be too concerned about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I might have to take a page from Representative's book and get off social media. We live in a world where people say whatever they want, and I think at the end of the day, I always remind myself that they're not saying this to me personally. We're not sitting down and having coffee. We're not, having this conversation face to face. They're not sending me an email or trying to learn more. So if it's, extremely offensive or rude, I remind myself that they can have that opinion, but they might not fully know who I am. And I sometimes will actually reach out to people and message them and say, I'm happy to chat more about your concerns or about your statements, and share more about it. But I just try to be, honest and really share, consistent in my approach, as was mentioned, and people are going to make assumptions and judgments whether or not you do, no matter what you do. And so, kind of putting up an understanding that it is not you personally they might be attacking. It's a concept, a position. They had a bad day. And so, at the end of the day, the more you can get out and talk to people, either face to face or like have real conversations, I think go a long way, because I think that's where we find common ground. And I don't think most people stand behind potentially something they wrote on a Facebook comment. Yeah, wouldn't say that necessarily if you really had a conversation.
Great. I know we're getting out of time, so I'm just going to kind of group together a couple things that are more just statements. So several people just want to say thank you to both of you for really spearheading the disability issues and the roles that you guys play. And just want to thank you for doing that and doing that so wonderfully. Also, there was a question about how to stay connected to what's happening legislatively in real time. To that question, I would say, please stay engaged with the Arc of Indiana or other advocacy groups that you are close to, who pay attention to public policy and have a legislative presence. Many of us send out regular emails and communications about what is happening in real time, and we want you to be engaged. So please watch for that. Tom, I'm going to kick it back over to you to close us out.
Excellent. Thank you, Kim, for walking through those. Yeah, as we wrap today's conversation, I first just want to thank you both. Amazing, thoughtful speakers, Councilor Kestler, Representative Greene, for sharing your journeys and the lessons you've learned along your way. I think your experience, your expertise, your openness, your practical advice have both been thoughtful and useful. I also want to thank all the attendees for joining us. Again, today isn't about politics. It's about representation. It's about recognizing that when people with disabilities and their families step into leadership roles, our communities and our policies are just frankly stronger. We hope you will leave with both inspiration and some practical insight about what public service can look like to help you kind of take that next step. We will be sending out a list of leadership development programs that are around the state, either statewide or regional based or subject matter based, that we hope is helpful for you all. Those programs provide training, networking, preparation for anyone interested in just civic leadership or advocacy or even elected office. So we hope that is a valuable resource. Again, thank you again for your time and for your lived experience that you bring. It does matter, and it has the power to really shape our better community. So thank you all for joining us today.